Welcome to the Black Church Leadership Podcast. I'm your producer Billy Ryan, and I'm thrilled to introduce our host Apostle Martin Wilson. Apostle Wilson has dedicated the last 30 years of his life to the subject of leadership and now seeks to help empowering individuals so that they can be the best versions of themselves. In this podcast, we'll explore the challenges and triumphs faced by Black church leaders today. Apostle Wilson and his esteemed guest will share his wisdom on effective leadership strategies and navigating societal issues that impact our congregations. Without further ado, let's go to our podcast already in progress.
Grace and peace. This is Bishop Martin Wilson, and I want to welcome you to the Black Church Leadership Podcast. This podcast, we've developed it, we've put it together to offer leadership teaching to help pastors of small to medium-sized churches, to give them an opportunity. A lot of times we have guests on that will offer leadership tips that they've learned through their years of experience. We've had some great people on. So if you have not tapped into our archives, if you would, please go to YouTube, and you can find us at the Black Church Leadership Podcast, or you can find us on Anchor FM, which is now Spotify for podcasters. You can find us on there. So we're going to get right into this teaching tonight. And this episode is going to be, I think it's going to be pretty short. I'm going to try. And we're going to discuss a section that was taught this week. I taught it on a leadership teaching this week with the bishops, apostles, and pastors from the Wolf Pack, which is the fellowship that I'm a part of. And we talked about the spirit of familiarity, the spirit of familiarity. And Webster defines familiarity as the quality of state or state of being familiar. Now, there's no problem with being familiar, but when familiar goes into excess, that's when the problem comes. So a state or quality of being familiar, the absence of formality or ceremony. So when we get into the context of leadership and into the context of ministry, familiarity refers to a lack of appropriate boundaries between leaders and those that they lead. And just by virtue of that definition, we can see that familiarity has the potential to be dangerous to anyone that's in leadership or a ministry position. So the spirit of familiarity refers to when a leader becomes overly friendly with the people that they lead or those that are close to them. And that's vice versa. When a member gets too friendly with a leader. And what happens, the result of those two components getting too friendly, is the lines become blurred between the leader and the subordinate, between the subordinate and the leader. And when this occurs with someone the leader is close to, it can lead to a lack of respect. If it's someone that's not a part of the ministry, but you don't set those proper boundaries with them, it can lead to them losing respect for you. If it happens or occurs with someone that you've been called to lead, then it may lead to not only a lack of respect, but they're no longer going to be able to respect your position or your authority. And that's not a good thing when you're called to lead someone. So ultimately, it results in a breakdown of the leader-follow dynamic. However it goes, either a member gets too close to a leader, or a leader gets too close and too friendly with a parishioner. That dynamic breaks down. The leader-follow dynamic breaks down. And in the context of ministry and church leadership, it's important. I cannot stress enough how important it is for leaders to maintain proper boundaries, but it's equally as important that followers also maintain proper boundaries. A lot of the incidents that we see that happen in churches where men and women of God are caught in situations with people of the opposite sex, and in this day and time with the same sex, is because they did not maintain proper boundaries. I don't believe that a lot of people that are getting caught in certain things, I don't believe that they intentionally went in, but the boundaries were blurred. The boundaries were not set. And if you have a leader that's not willing to set proper boundaries, this can be potentially dangerous, as it can lead to a potential abuse. In other words, you're there to serve the leader, but it can, when those boundaries are not clear, that leader can end up abusing their authority, abusing their power. When that leader calls you to do things that are outside of the scope of your normal service for them, then it's out of the will of God. I mean, it's one thing to serve a man or woman of God, but when they get you to the point where you're if you volunteer to do something, that's one thing. Taking their clothes to the laundry and things of that sort, if that's something that you do as their adjutant, that's something that you do, then that's okay. But if there's a realm where it becomes out of boundaries, and you've got to know what those boundaries are, you got to know what the will of God for your life is. Failure to set proper boundaries has the potential to create a toxic environment. I hear people all the time talking about, I've been hurt in the church. Well, did you set proper boundaries? Were the proper boundaries set? Were they set so that the environment did not become toxic or harmful to both the leader or for the ones that they lead? So familiarity has the potential also to be dangerous to the reputation of the leader and the ministry. When a leader becomes too familiar with those that they lead, it can lead to a breakdown, as we said, of that leader follow dynamic. That dynamic needs to be there. And I'm not talking about a leader being distant. I'm not talking about you being standoffish to the people, but there are proper boundaries that will help kill the spirit of familiarity. And I don't care how much you listen, please understand, because I know someone's cringing as they watch this, but I don't care how much you say that your people love you. They are always looking, listening, and talking. And what may be okay for you and someone else is looking, and everybody's not on your side. Some people are jealous, and some people see things from where they are. So we have to make sure that there are boundaries in place. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:22, abstain from all appearance of evil. One translation says the very appearance of evil. So even though we keep telling people that things aren't the way they seem, we say that a lot. Things are not always the way they seem. They're going to remember what they saw. They're going to remember what they saw. And there are some things that Christian leaders should just never do with people of the opposite sex who are not their spouse. Number one, be with them in a private setting. If I'm going to counsel a person of the opposite sex, my wife is there, or my wife knows, or we're in a public place. You don't want to leave room for speculation. And I always give this advice to young ministers. You do not want to put yourself in a position where it's your word against theirs. Leave the door open, whatever you have to do, so that you don't put yourself in a completely private setting with an individual that could say that you did something and you didn't do it. But that speculation can be there because you didn't set the proper boundaries. Number two is touching them in any way that could be considered inappropriate. An example of touching someone inappropriately would be touching someone in a way that could be perceived as flirtatious or sexual, such as, and you're patting a woman on the leg, or you're patting a man on the leg, or you go up behind your your female pastor and you're rubbing her neck or vice versa. It's important as Christian leaders to avoid any behavior that could be seen as inappropriate or compromising to maintaining appropriate boundaries and avoiding any appearance of impropriety. One thing that I always look at when I go to churches is your greeters and ushers. And even when you're greeting someone, of the opposite sex, there's certain guidelines that you ought to put in place. It's considered proper for if you're hugging someone of the opposite sex that you give that side shoulder hug instead of a full body hug, unless it's your spouse. You've got to have those things in place. And you as a leader, you may mean nothing by it, but it could be perceived the wrong way by the individual. It could be perceived the wrong way by a spouse of the individual. So you got to have those guidelines in place. No full body hugs. Throw that shoulder in there. And number 3, you should never engage in any behavior that could be seen as flirtatious or romantic. And the key word there is seen as. As again, you can explain all day, but people are going to remember what they see. So an example of this would be a pastor or a ministry leader, if they were to take a member of the opposite sex out to dinner or to a movie. Listen, even going to their house at a certain time of day, that you've got to watch yourself. So important. Even if it's an innocent outing, it could be perceived as flirtatious or romantic, which would be inappropriate for someone in a leadership position. And I know we like to say, well, I don't care what people think. Wrong attitude for leadership. You're already disqualified. You're already disqualified if you're at a place where you say that you don't care what people think, because the Bible said we should have a good report within and without. In the church, we should have a good reputation. Outside of the church, we should have a good reputation. So it's important for Christian leaders to set boundaries and avoid any behavior that could be seen as inappropriate or compromising. So another thing that I always look at when I go to a ministry are the greeters and the ushers. Greeters and ushers. When you're working the altar, it should be male ushers working with males, and it should be female ushers working with the females. That is just I won't say that because I don't want to sound demeaning, but it is common sense. Because a man should never be catching a woman, because it's real easy for you to be trying to catch her and touch a part of her body that should not be touched. So these goes back to putting those boundaries in place, and maintaining boundaries is crucial. It's crucial. I know someone say, "Oh, this teaching was unnecessary," but it's very critical for Christian leaders to assure that they do not compromise their reputation of their own reputation or their ministry. Some people kill their ministry even before they get started because of their behavior. And it's important for leaders to lead by example and to hold themselves accountable and avoid any appearance of impropriety. You do not want to mess up your reputation. What is the spirit of familiarity? Why is it dangerous? Why is it dangerous when it comes to ministry and church leadership? I hope you enjoyed this. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Black Church Leadership Podcast. Thank you. God bless.
You have been listening to the Black Church Leadership Podcast with Master Life Coach and NLP practitioner, Apostle Martin Wilson.